Are you anxiously attached, or are you actually a fearful avoidant and you don't even know it? So many times I have clients that'll come to me thinking that they are anxious attachers, but it becomes pretty apparent they're actually an FA, a fearful avoidant, not anxious preoccupied. So how do you know if you're actually an anxious attacher or if you're truly a fearful avoidant? There are a lot of commonalities, but there are some differences. Let's get into it. The first difference really starts in childhood. Anxious attachers generally grew up in more stable environments. They might have a parent that's narcissistic, they might not. But generally, they usually have both parents in the household. Generally, not capital T trauma. There might be some hot and cold behavior from a parent or parents, but their basic needs are generally met. Food, clothing, shelter. And their emotional needs are met sometimes. They might have one parent that's completely emotionally available, one that's not. Or they have both parents that are emotionally available, but something happens. Maybe both parents now have to work two jobs and they're less present in the house. And what it teaches the child at a young age is that when your emotional needs are being met, they can be taken away from you, which creates anxious attachment. It's that fear of having the emotional needs taken away. The primary wound being abandonment. Even if they weren't actually abandoned by a parent or a caretaker, getting the needs taken away is emotional abandonment, and that is the core wound. Anxious preoccupied, they do not have a dismissive avoidance side. Fearful avoidance, on the other hand, they have disorganized attachment. They have both an anxious preoccupied and dismissive avoidant attachment style, and they can fluctuate back and forth between the two. Now, fearful avoidance generally grew up with a little bit more volatility and chaos, more often broken homes. They too often had a narcissistic parent, not always. Sometimes they had capital T trauma, or they grew up in environments where there was betrayal. For example, one parent cheated on the other. The house got broken up. Maybe even some emotional or even sometimes physical abuse. But there was chaos and volatility in a way that there really wasn't with the anxious attacher. Now, the core wound for the fearful avoidant is not abandonment. Yes, they fear abandonment too, but the core wound is betrayal. In some way, shape, or form, they had a parent or caretaker that betrayed their trust. And their emotional needs were not consistently met. And what they learned is that when you get too close to somebody, you get hurt, you get betrayed. Maybe it was a parent cheating and leaving. Maybe it was some sort of emotional or physical abuse, but in some way, shape, or form, that trust was broken. So now they carry the core belief that love equals pain, it equals betrayal. And yes, betrayal leads to abandonment, but the core wound for anxious preoccupied is abandonment, and the core wound for fearful avoidance is betrayal. These core wounds will affect how they show up in the relationship. The anxious preoccupied is generally not going to initiate much in the way of conflict. They're generally going to avoid conflict, and some of them can actually fear conflict just as much as a dismissive avoidant. They don't like conflict at all. Yes, they can engage in it, especially if provoked, but they generally don't initiate much conflict. Of course, there's exceptions. But when there is conflict, they are much more likely to fawn, to try to over-apologize and to beg and to plead and to cry and to try to get the other person to understand their feelings and understand their pain and smooth everything over and prevent the abandonment. Fearful avoidance, on the other hand, they are more likely to initiate conflict, especially when they perceive that there's some sort of betrayal, when they've been hurt. And they can push a partner away, whereas the anxious preoccupied generally does not push a partner away, but the fearful avoidant absolutely can. And they can become quite cold during conflict. They can essentially shut down and sometimes be very cold and cutting with their words, trying to essentially even the playing field, trying to get the other person to feel their pain. The anxious attacher will try to get the other person to understand their pain. The fearful avoidant will often try to get the other person to feel their pain. Not because they are trying to punish in a narcissistic way or anything of the sort, but because they want to be seen and understood and heard, and that is their method. You hurt me, so now I hurt you. Well, now we're even. And the fearful avoidant is far more likely to do those pushes away, to self-isolate, to distance, whereas the anxious preoccupied is so afraid of abandonment that they are never really wanting to pull away, push a person away. They're always wanting to smooth things over and make sure everything is good. The fearful avoidant is going to be much better at self-regulation because they do have that avoidance side. They can calm themselves, whereas the anxious preoccupied really struggles with self-regulation, and they really have a very hard time feeling okay and feeling calm and feeling happy and comfortable when there's distress in the relationship or distress with their partner. Anxious preoccupied, much more likely to be a people pleaser, essentially sometimes even morphing themselves to mirror the interests of the other person to earn their affection and stave off abandonment. Fearful avoidance, on the other hand, they really are much more willing to take that space to regulate themselves. And they largely get triggered into the anxious mode with a partner that's emotionally unavailable, a partner that has walls off, and it puts them into that anxious mindset of having to earn the love. Whereas the anxious attacher is generally going to be anxious regardless of who they are in a relationship with. Anxious attachers are more likely to last in relationships with partners that are emotionally available, ones that are maybe mildly anxious or secure. Fearful avoidants are much more likely to latch on to emotionally unavailable partners, but push away emotionally available partners. They can last a long time in relationships with narcissists or dismissive avoidants, constantly trying to earn that love. But when they get into a relationship with somebody who's secure to mildly anxious, their avoidance side will kick in, becoming way more hypervigilant, looking for any signs of inconsistencies that prove that betrayal is coming, and use that as an excuse to create emotional distance and push their partner away. But meanwhile, they long for that deep love and connection because they really are in touch with their emotions. They want the intimacy, but when they get it, it triggers the betrayal wound and they feel unsafe. But they can last with the unavailable partner because the unavailable partner, even though they do betray them, there is no intimacy, which doesn't really trigger that betrayal wound in the same way. Fearful avoidants are also far more likely to confuse anxiety for a chemistry and a spark. Now, due to that volatility and that trauma, the chaos, the betrayal that they experienced as a child, when they do get in front of a person that's emotionally unavailable, such as a narcissist or a dismissive avoidant, their subconscious recognizes that this person is emotionally unsafe and signals anxiety, but their conscious mind confuses that anxiety with excitement, healthy excitement, a chemistry or a spark, when in reality it's their nervous system trying to warn them that this person's unsafe. But when they get into a relationship with a partner that is emotionally safe and emotionally available, they don't get that anxiety because their nervous system recognizes that this person's safe, but their conscious brain will often confuse it, telling them that this person is boring or there's no chemistry and there's no spark. So they can be much more prone to immediately jump into relationships with unavailable partners and immediately push away available partners. Now, when they do get into relationships with available partners, if the fearful avoidant is not self-aware or if they lean more dismissive, their hypervigilance will kick in and they will start finding inconsistencies in the available partner, push them away to justify their urges to exit the relationship. Now, that said, fearful avoidants that lean more anxious and ones that are self-aware are very capable of maintaining healthy long-term relationships and working through their issues. Not all fearful avoidants are emotionally unavailable. Some are, some aren't. Some can make great partners, especially ones that are willing to work on themselves and willing to take accountability. But due to having been in relationships with emotionally unavailable people, many fearful avoidants are not aware that they actually are fearful avoidant, thinking they're anxious preoccupied because they've never actually experienced a relationship with a partner that is emotionally available. So are you AP or FA? Look within and figure it out.